The SEAL captain scanned the room with eyes that had witnessed the darkest corners of warfare, his question hanging in the air like smoke after artillery fire. "Any combat pilots here?" In that moment of tense silence, she felt the weight of every pair of eyes as her hand steadily rose above the sea of military personnel. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The forward operating base stood like a fragile mirage against the vast desert landscape, its perimeter marked by hastily constructed sandbag walls and scattered concrete barriers. Razor wire glinted under the harsh floodlights, creating twisted shadows across the packed dirt. The night sky hung heavy above, stars obscured by a thin veil of dust that never seemed to settle in this forgotten corner of the war. Inside the command bunker, the SEAL captain hunched over a tactical map, his weathered face etched with lines of exhaustion and concern. Blood-stained bandages wrapped around his forearm where a bullet had grazed him hours earlier. He barely noticed the pain anymore. Around him, his team moved with the slow, deliberate motions of men, running on nothing but muscle memory and stubborn will. "Secure that door," he ordered, voice low, but carrying the weight of authority that had kept them alive through countless missions. Two operators immediately complied, dragging a metal cabinet across the entrance. The mission had started as a standard reconnaissance operation. Intelligence had indicated enemy movement in a nearby village, nothing the team couldn't handle. But intelligence had been catastrophically wrong. Instead of the expected small contingent, they'd encountered a heavily armed force that had been lying in wait. The extraction point had become a killing zone. "Comms still down?" the captain asked, already knowing the answer. The communications specialist shook his head, frustration evident in every line of his body. "Satellite uplink is compromised. We're getting nothing but static." Around the room, men checked weapons and inventoried remaining ammunition. The metallic clicks and soft murmurs couldn't mask the underlying tension. Everyone understood their situation without needing it spelled out. 3 men nursed wounds, nothing immediately life-threatening, but serious enough to hamper their fighting capability. Their ammunition stocks were dangerously low, and somewhere out there in the darkness, their pursuers were regrouping. Lieutenant Cross, his face streaked with grime and dried blood, approached the captain. "Perimeter sensors picked up movement 3 clicks east," he reported quietly. "They're probing, looking for weak points." The captain nodded grimly. Without air support or reinforcements, the base had become a trap. The concrete walls that had once represented safety now felt like a tomb. Every man in the room knew the cold mathematics of their situation. Outnumbered, outgunned, and cut off from command. "How long?" asked one of the younger SEALs. Voice steady despite the question's weight. The captain studied the map once more, calculating distances and enemy capabilities. "Dawn," he finally answered. "They'll hit us at dawn." The unspoken truth settled over the room. Without a miracle, none of them would see another sunset. The SEAL captain hunched over the command table, his weathered face illuminated by the dim glow of tactical displays. Maps sprawled across the surface, marked with urgent red circles and hastily drawn defensive positions. His fingers traced potential enemy approach routes, while dust particles danced in the stale air around him. 18 years of combat had taught him to read battlefields like others read weather patterns, and tonight's forecast was grim. "Sir, perimeter teams report movement to the east," a young operator called from his radio station. "Same pattern as before." The captain merely nodded, the weight of command settling deeper into his shoulders. Around him, his men maintained a practiced calm, checking weapons, distributing ammunition, securing communications. But he recognized the tension in their movements, the way conversations dropped to whispers. These were hardened warriors who had faced death countless times, yet tonight felt different. Tonight, they were trapped. "Battery levels on night vision?" he asked, not looking up from the maps. 50%, sir. We're conserving where possible." The captain ran a hand across 3 days of stubble. Their forward operating base had never been designed to withstand a sustained assault. It was a temporary position that circumstances had forced them to defend with makeshift barriers and limited supplies. The extraction mission had gone sideways hours ago, leaving them stranded in hostile territory with wounded men and dwindling resources. A senior chief approached, his face a mask of controlled concern. "The men are ready, sir, but without air support." He let the sentence hang unfinished. "I know," the captain replied, straightening to his full height. The room fell silent as he surveyed his team. These men had followed him through hell before, but this time felt different. This time, he might be leading them to their end. The radio crackled with another update. Enemy forces regrouping, likely preparing for a final push. The captain's mind raced through scenarios, each ending with the same conclusion. Without help from above, the base would fall before dawn. Desperation sharpened his voice as he addressed the room. "Listen up. We've got maybe 3 hours before they hit us with everything they've got." He paused, scanning the faces of his men. "I need options. Anything." The silence that followed confirmed what everyone knew. There were no good options left. Then, almost as an afterthought, a question formed on his lips, one born more from futility than hope. "Any combat pilots here?" he asked, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer. The room remained still, operators exchanging glances or looking away. No one expected an answer to break the silence. The silence that followed the SEAL captain's desperate question hung in the air like a physical weight. 26 men, hardened by combat and the brutal realities of war, exchanged uncomfortable glances or suddenly found the dust-covered floor intensely interesting. Some shifted their weight, the creak of tactical gear punctuating the heavy stillness. Others remained frozen, as if movement might somehow force them to acknowledge the hopelessness of their situation. The captain's weathered face remained impassive, but the tightening around his eyes betrayed his disappointment. He hadn't truly expected an answer. The question had been born of desperation rather than hope. Then came the sound, a simple wooden chair scraping against concrete. The noise cut through the silence like a rifle shot, drawing every eye in the room to its source. At the far end of the command room, partially hidden in shadow, a woman in dust-caked fatigue slowly rose to her feet. She wasn't tall or physically imposing. In fact, many of the operators had barely registered her presence before this moment. Her uniform bore the faded patch of the Air Force, not their own naval insignia, marking her as someone outside their tight-knit brotherhood. Yet something in her posture commanded attention. She stood perfectly still, shoulders squared, chin slightly raised, not in defiance or bravado, but with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was capable of. The ambient light caught the edges of her face, revealing eyes that held neither fear nor uncertainty, only calm resolve. The room's attention focused on her with laser intensity. Several operators straightened instinctively, responding to the sudden shift in energy. The senior chief, positioned near the captain, narrowed his eyes, his expression a mixture of surprise and skepticism. For 3 heartbeats, she said nothing, simply holding the collective gaze of the room. Then, without raising her voice or adding unnecessary words, she spoke with clarity that reached every corner of the command center. "I can fly." 3 simple syllables, delivered without flourish or drama, yet they changed everything. The captain's posture shifted almost imperceptibly, his eyes locking onto hers across the room, measuring and evaluating. No one spoke. The distant thump of artillery fire punctuated the moment, a stark reminder of what waited beyond their walls. The woman, this unexpected potential savior, remained standing, neither elaborating nor backing down from the weight of 26 desperate stares. In that moment, though none of them yet knew her call sign or her combat record, she had accomplished something remarkable. She had transformed absolute hopelessness into the first fragile spark of possibility. Her words fell like thunder in the cramped command room. The SEAL captain straightened his back, his weathered face a mask of careful neutrality as he studied the woman who had just volunteered. Around them, the other operators exchanged glances, some skeptical, others curious, none dismissive. In their world, where each mission balanced on the knife edge between life and death, trust wasn't given freely. It was earned through blood, sweat, and proven competence. "You can fly," the captain repeated, his voice neither mocking nor immediately convinced. His eyes narrowed slightly, measuring her with the same calculating gaze he'd used to assess countless threats across battlefields worldwide. Valkyrie stood tall, despite her unassuming stature. The dust and grime on her fatigues matched everyone else's. Just another face on base until this moment. But something in her posture spoke of cockpit hours and combat decisions made at supersonic speeds. "What do you fly, exactly?" the captain asked, his tone direct but not unkind. The question hung in the air, a test in itself. Around them, the other SEALs had gone quiet. Their weapon checks and preparations momentarily paused as they awaited her answer. Without hesitation or bravado, she replied, "A-10 Thunderbolt." Her voice carried the quiet confidence of someone stating an irrefutable fact rather than making a claim. A ripple moved through the room. The A-10, the Warthog, wasn't just any aircraft. It was a legend among ground forces, a flying tank designed around its massive cannon, built to absorb punishment while delivering hell to anyone threatening American troops. Every man in that room had either seen one in action or heard the stories. The distinctive sound of its cannon, like the sky being torn open, the almost supernatural way it could appear when hope seemed lost. One of the senior operators nodded almost imperceptibly. Another shifted his weight, reassessing the woman who had just revealed herself as something more than they'd assumed. The captain's expression remained unchanged, but something flickered behind his eyes. A calculating look that measured possibilities against desperate circumstances. "The Warthog," he said, not a question but an acknowledgement. She nodded once, her gaze unwavering. In that simple exchange, something fundamental had shifted in the room. Skepticism remained. It always would until proven otherwise. But now it was tinged with something else. Possibility. The captain didn't smile, but his shoulders relaxed a fraction. Every SEAL in that room knew what a combat-ready A-10 could mean for their survival. If she really could fly it, if she really was what she claimed, then perhaps their odds had just improved from impossible to merely desperate. The A-10 Thunderbolt was a legend among ground troops, not for its beauty, but for its brutal efficiency. In the tense command room, one of the SEALs let out a low whistle at the mention of the aircraft's name. The Warthog, as troops affectionately called it, wasn't sleek or fast like the fighter jets that typically dominated the skies. Instead, it was a flying fortress, built around its massive GAU-8 Avenger cannon, a weapon so powerful that when fired, it could temporarily slow the aircraft's forward momentum. "The Warthog," muttered the SEAL captain, his weathered face showing the first hint of hope since their return. He'd seen what that aircraft could do firsthand during his second deployment. The distinctive sound of its cannon, a thunderous, otherworldly brrrt that rained depleted uranium rounds at 4,000 per minute, had saved his squad more than once. The room's atmosphere shifted subtly. Men who moments before had been preparing for death now exchanged glances tinged with something new. Not quite optimism, they were too experienced for that, but possibility. "There's one on the runway," said a senior operator near the back. "Maintenance crew's been working on it for 3 days. Don't think they finished." Valkyrie nodded, unperturbed. "I can check it myself. A-10s are built to fly damaged. That's their whole purpose." She wasn't exaggerating. The Thunderbolt was designed to absorb punishment that would destroy any other aircraft. Its cockpit was surrounded by a titanium tub that pilots called the bathtub, capable of withstanding direct hits from anti-aircraft fire. It could fly with one engine, half a wing gone, and systems failing. It was, in every sense, The perfect aircraft for their desperate situation. "If you can get that bird in the air," the captain said, measuring each word, "what then?" "Then I find your men across the valley," she replied, her confidence unwavering. "The Warthog carries enough ordnance to clear a path through anything they're facing." Around the room, the SEALs began to understand what her appearance might mean. If she could actually pilot the grounded aircraft, if the maintenance issues weren't terminal, if she could navigate the mountain pass at night, a lot of ifs, but each one represented a chance they hadn't had minutes ago. The captain studied her face, searching for any hint of doubt or bravado. Finding none, he nodded once. "Show me," he said. Those two words changed everything. Suddenly, the command room was alive with renewed purpose. Men who had been mentally preparing final messages to loved ones were now checking weapons, readying equipment. The impossible had become merely improbable, and for special operators, that was more than enough. The tension in the command room was palpable as the SEAL captain's weathered face hardened. His men exchanged glances, their skepticism visible in the tight set of their jaws and crossed arms. The captain leaned forward, his palms flat against the map-strewn table, eyes locked on Valkyrie. "Let me be clear," he said, voice low but carrying to every corner of the room. "This isn't a training exercise or a routine mission. If you take that bird up and can't deliver, every man in this room, and Lieutenant Cross's team in that valley, is dead by sunrise." She didn't flinch at his bluntness. The combat pilot stood with her shoulders squared, hands relaxed at her sides, meeting his gaze with unwavering certainty. The dust from the day's operations still clung to her fatigues, but there was nothing uncertain about her posture. "With respect, sir, I know exactly what's at stake," she replied. Her voice carried a quiet authority that made several operators look up from their weapons. "I've flown close air support when teams were overrun. I understand the cost of failure." The captain studied her face, searching for any hint of doubt or bravado. He found neither, just the steady resolve of someone who had faced combat from above and knew its brutal arithmetic. "The Warthog on our runway hasn't flown in 3 weeks, one of the senior SEALs interjected. "Maintenance has been patching it with whatever parts they could salvage." Valkyrie nodded once. "I've flown worse. The A-10 was built to take punishment and keep flying." Something in her quiet confidence began to shift the energy in the room. A few operators straightened, exchanging glances that contained the first fragile seeds of hope. The radio specialist at the corner table stopped fidgeting with his equipment and turned to watch. "You understand there's no backup," the captain continued. "No second chances. No extraction for you if things go sideways." "Yes, sir." Her response was immediate, without hesitation. The captain held her gaze for 3 more seconds before giving an almost imperceptible nod. The decision had been made, not with enthusiasm, but with the grim calculus of men with few options. "Show me," he finally said. Around the room, operators who moments before had been preparing for their last stand began to move with renewed purpose. The weight of despair lifted slightly, replaced by something that wasn't quite optimism, but was no longer resignation. As the captain gestured toward the door, Valkyrie followed, her steps measured and confident. Behind them, the command room buzzed with activity. Radios crackled to life, weapons were checked with fresh urgency, and men who had been preparing to die began cautiously to consider the possibility of survival. All because she had quietly risen to her feet. "Show me," the captain said with a curt nod, his weathered face betraying the first hint of possibility since the mission had gone sideways. The command room transformed in seconds. Radios crackled to life as operators grabbed their gear, the energy shifting from resignation to focused determination. The captain barked orders, directing teams to reinforce the eastern perimeter, where intelligence suggested the enemy would concentrate their attack. Men who moments ago had been slumped against walls now moved with renewed purpose, checking ammunition and securing communications. Valkyrie stood quietly amid the controlled chaos, her presence already changing the calculus of their survival. A senior SEAL with a thick beard handed her a tactical vest and nodded. The smallest acknowledgement, but in this world, it meant everything. "If you're going out there, you'll need this," he said, his voice gruff but no longer dismissive. She accepted the gear with a practiced motion, years of combat experience evident in how she adjusted the straps without looking. The weight of the vest felt familiar against her shoulders, different from a flight suit, but part of the same world of calculated risks and split-second decisions. Across the room, two operators hunched over a topographical map, plotting defensive positions with fresh intensity. Their conversation drifted across the space. Talk of angles, fields of fire, and holding patterns that might buy precious minutes if the Warthog could actually take flight. "Johnson, Martinez, I want eyes on that ridgeline," the captain ordered, pointing to a position on the map. "If she's going up, we need to know exactly where those bastards have their anti-aircraft positioned." The men nodded, gathering night vision equipment and heading for the door. One of them glanced back at Valkyrie, something new in his expression. Not quite trust, not yet, but the seed of hope taking root. Outside, the sounds of preparation echoed across the base, vehicles being moved to create better defensive positions, ammunition crates dragged across concrete, the metallic clicks of weapons being checked and loaded. Through the small window, floodlights flickered to life along the runway, illuminating the dark silhouette of the A-10. The captain approached Valkyrie, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "You understand what's at stake. If that bird doesn't fly, or if you can't make it count—" "I understand," she replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I've been in the valley they're trapped in. I know what's waiting for them if we don't act." He studied her face for a moment longer, then gestured toward the door. Beyond it lay the runway, the aircraft, and a desperate gamble that might save them all. All because one pilot quietly rose to her feet when no one else could. Valkyrie and the SEAL captain stepped into the desert night, leaving behind the tense atmosphere of the command room. The air outside felt different, electric with possibility rather than heavy with defeat. Sand crunched beneath their boots as they made their way across the darkened base, their path illuminated only by scattered security lights, casting long shadows across the packed earth. "She's been grounded for 3 weeks, the captain explained, his voice low and gravelly. "Maintenance issues, parts shortages, the usual bureaucratic nightmare." Valkyrie nodded, but remained silent, her eyes already fixed on the distant silhouette taking shape at the edge of the makeshift runway. The A-10 Thunderbolt sat like a sleeping giant under flickering lamps, its distinctive silhouette unmistakable even from a distance. The straight wings, twin engines mounted high on the fuselage, and that unmistakable nose where the massive GAU-8 Avenger cannon resided. As they passed a parked Humvee, her hand reached out almost unconsciously, fingertips brushing across its dusty metal surface. The contact triggered a flood of sensory memories. The vibration of the throttle, the weight of the flight stick, the symphony of gauges and switches that had become second nature during her tours in Afghanistan. She could almost feel the G-forces pressing against her chest, hear the deafening roar of the GAU-8 unleashing its fury. The captain noticed her gesture. "You miss it?" he stated rather than asked. "Every day," she replied, pulling her hand away from the military vehicle. "Flying isn't just what I do, it's who I am." They continued walking, their pace quickening slightly as they approached the aircraft. Two mechanics lounged nearby, looking up with surprised expressions as the unlikely pair approached. "This isn't about recognition," Valkyrie said suddenly, breaking the silence between them. "I'm not looking to be anyone's hero." The weathered officer glanced at her, his face half illuminated by the distant floodlights. "Then why?" She paused, considering her words carefully. "Because that's what I trained for, what I swore to do." Her eyes remained fixed on the Warthog's hulking form. "Those men in the valley need someone who can bring that bird to life. I can do that." They reached the edge of the runway, standing now in the shadow of the aircraft. Up close, the A-10 looked even more formidable, a machine designed for one purpose, to protect troops on the ground at all costs. "It won't be an easy flight," the captain warned, his voice carrying the weight of command and concern. Valkyrie nodded, her expression resolute. "The easy flights aren't the ones that matter." Inside the command room, a heavy silence had fallen. The seasoned Navy SEALs exchanged glances, their skepticism palpable in the stale air. Valkyrie didn't match their mental image of a combat pilot. She was just another face they'd passed on base. Hands perpetually stained with engine grease, fatigues worn thin, from work rather than missions. Nothing about her physical presence commanded attention. She wasn't tall or imposing, didn't carry herself with the swagger many pilots seem to cultivate. "You expect us to believe she can fly that thing?" muttered one of the younger operators, his voice low but audible across the room. The SEAL captain shot him a warning glance, but said nothing. The question hung in the air, legitimate in its doubt. Their lives would depend on her skill if this desperate plan moved forward. She stood straight-backed near the makeshift planning table, neither defensive nor boastful under their scrutiny. When she spoke, her voice carried the same calm confidence that had surprised them moments earlier. "I understand your hesitation," she said, addressing not just the captain, but the entire room. "But I've pulled wounded soldiers out of valleys worse than this one. The Warthog isn't just an aircraft to me, it's an extension of myself." A senior operator with a graying beard leaned forward. "We've all seen hotshots who talk big and deliver small," he challenged, eyes narrowed. "What makes you different?" She didn't flinch. "I'm not here to convince you with words. Judge me by what I do in that cockpit." Something in her steady gaze, the absolute certainty behind it, began to shift the energy in the room. These men had survived because they could read people, sense weakness or strength in an instant. And despite her unassuming appearance, there was steel beneath her quiet demeanor. The communications specialist, who had remained silent until now, suddenly straightened. "Wait, 2 years ago, Kandahar Valley. That was you?" His eyes widened with recognition. 3 squads pinned down, no hope in hell. Then this A-10 comes screaming in. She nodded once, neither proud nor modest, just acknowledging facts. The room's atmosphere subtly changed. Doubt remained. These were men who trusted actions over words, but respect had begun to take root. They'd all seen the impossible happen in combat, when ordinary people revealed extraordinary capabilities under pressure. The captain studied her for another long moment, weighing options that all ended in death against this single fragile hope. Her unwavering confidence demanded attention, not through volume or bravado, but through its quiet certainty. "If you're half as good as you seem to think you are," he finally said, "we might actually live through the night." The SEAL captain leaned across the table, his weathered face illuminated by the single bulb swinging overhead. The room had fallen into a tense silence, every operator watching this unexpected exchange. "Can you actually get that bird in the air tonight?" he asked, voice low but cutting through the quiet like a blade. "Not tomorrow, not with ideal conditions. Tonight, with what we have." Valkyrie met his gaze without flinching. The team leader wasn't being cruel, just practical. In their world, false hope killed faster than bullets. "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice steady. "I've flown A-10s with worse maintenance records in Afghanistan. The Warthog isn't pretty, but she's designed to take punishment and keep flying." A senior operator in the corner scoffed. "That aircraft hasn't been properly serviced in 3 months." "I know," she nodded. "I helped the ground crew patch the hydraulics last week. The starboard engine runs hot, and the comms system needs manual calibration. But the weapons systems are operational, and the airframe is solid." The captain studied her face, looking for any flicker of doubt. He found none. "The runway's compromised," he continued, testing her resolve. "Last mortar attack left craters on the north end." "I've taken off from worse," she countered. "The Thunderbolt needs less than 3,000 feet. I can work with what we have." Around the room, the energy was shifting. The operators exchanged glances, still doubtful, but something else was emerging. Interest. Maybe even the first fragile threads of hope. "And if you get airborne," the captain pressed, "what then? We've got men trapped in that valley with hostiles closing in from 3 sides." "Then I do what the A-10 was built for," she said simply. "Close air support. The GAU-8 will clear a path for your men to extract." A technical sergeant who'd been silent until now spoke up. "Fuel situation's critical. We've got maybe enough for 45 minutes of flight time." "That's all I need," she responded, calculations already running behind her eyes. 20 minutes to reach the valley, 15 for combat operations, 10 to return. The captain straightened, weighing the impossible odds against the certainty in her voice. Outside, the distant rumble of enemy vehicles grew louder. Time was running out. "If this doesn't work," he began. "Then we're no worse off than we are right now," she finished for him. "But it will work." Something in her quiet confidence was infectious. The military leader saw the change rippling through his men, backs straightening, hands steadier on weapons. For the first time since their extraction had gone sideways, possibility hung in the air. "All right," he finally said, decision made. "The Warthog is yours, Valkyrie. Show us what you can do." The senior chief stepped forward, arms crossed over his chest. His weathered face, lined with years of combat, betrayed nothing but skepticism. The room fell silent as he addressed Valkyrie directly. "With all due respect, ma'am, I've never seen you in any briefing. How do we know you can actually fly that thing?" His voice carried the weight of men's lives in the balance. The woman didn't flinch under his scrutiny. Standing straight, she met his gaze with unwavering confidence. The tension in the command room thickened as operators exchanged glances, waiting for her response. "2 tours in Afghanistan," she stated matter-of-factly. 63 close air support missions, specialized in danger-close operations with special forces teams. She paused, letting the facts speak for themselves rather than embellishing with unnecessary bravado. "My call sign is Valkyrie." The SEAL captain's head snapped up at that name. Recognition flickered across his face. Valkyrie, the legendary pilot who had saved a pinned-down MARSOP team in the Korengal Valley, when no other aircraft would risk the approach. The story had circulated through special operations circles for years. "The Korengal extraction?" he asked, his voice quieter now. She nodded once. "That was my bird." A murmur rippled through the assembled operators. The senior chief's posture softened slightly, though doubt still lingered in his eyes. "Why are you here?" the captain pressed. "Why aren't you with your squadron?" "Temporary reassignment," she explained. "I was evaluating avionics upgrades on forward-deployed aircraft when the base went into lockdown." Her hands remained steady at her sides, her voice calm, despite the life-or-death stakes hanging in the air. The captain studied her for a long moment, weighing her words against the desperate situation facing his men. Outside, the distant crack of gunfire punctuated the decision he needed to make. Finally, he nodded. "The Warthog is yours, Valkyrie." Relief wasn't quite the right word for what passed through the room. It was something more tentative, a fragile hope taking root amid persistent doubt. Several operators still exchanged skeptical glances, unconvinced that this unassuming woman could pilot the massive attack aircraft, much less turn the tide of their desperate situation. The captain seemed to sense their hesitation. "If anyone can get that bird in the air and bring our people home, it's her." Valkyrie acknowledged his confidence with a slight nod, her focus already shifting to the mental checklist of pre-flight procedures. She knew the weight of what was being placed on her shoulders, not just the responsibility of flying the aircraft, but the lives of men who would live or die based on her skill in the cockpit. The desert air hung heavy with uncertainty, but for the first time since the base had been surrounded, there was a path forward, narrow and dangerous, but real. "Let's move," Valkyrie commanded. her voice carrying unexpected authority for someone who had, until minutes ago, been invisible to the SEAL team. The captain nodded, signaling 2 operators to escort her. They fell into step beside her without question, their weathered faces betraying neither confidence nor doubt, merely professional focus. The trio navigated through the dimly lit corridors of the forward operating base, their boots kicking up small clouds of desert dust that had infiltrated every corner of the compound. Behind them, the command center erupted into controlled chaos as the remaining SEALs prepared defensive positions. If her plan failed, they would need every advantage when the enemy forces arrived. "We've got mechanics on standby," one of the operators informed her, his voice low and gravelly from years of shouting over gunfire. Captain radioed ahead. She acknowledged with a curt nod, her mind already running through pre-flight checklists. The Warthog had been grounded for maintenance for 3 days. Not ideal, but she'd flown worse. As they approached the exit leading to the airfield, a young mechanic sprinted past them, tools jangling at his belt. Word was spreading throughout the base. The impossible was being attempted. They stepped outside, and the desert night hit them with its peculiar combination of lingering heat and creeping cold. Overhead, stars punctured the darkness with alarming clarity, the kind only found far from civilization. Floodlights suddenly blazed to life along the runway, casting harsh shadows across the cracked tarmac and illuminating their destination. There she stood, the A-10 Thunderbolt, her silhouette unmistakable even from this distance. Ungainly yet magnificent, with her straight wings and twin engines mounted high on the fuselage. The aircraft that pilots loved and enemies feared. "She's fueled up," the second operator said, breaking his silence. "Munitions are loaded standard. Not a full complement, but enough to make a statement." Whispers followed them across the open ground as personnel emerged from various stations. Some pointed, others stared in disbelief. A female pilot? For this mission? The murmurs were predictable, but Valkyrie had stopped hearing them years ago. "You really think you can get that beast airborne?" the first operator asked, his tone softening just enough to reveal genuine curiosity rather than challenge. "I don't think," she replied, eyes fixed on the aircraft. "I know." As they approached the Warthog, a small team of mechanics scattered around its hulking form, checking panels and connections with renewed urgency. One gave her a thumbs up, the universal signal that the impossible might just be possible. The glimmer of faith that had sparked in the command room was growing now, spreading across the base like a contagion. Not hope yet. These men had seen too much to embrace hope easily, but something close to it. Something that might just be enough to get them through the night. The floodlights cast harsh shadows across the tarmac as Valkyrie approached the A-10 Thunderbolt. She slowed her pace, allowing herself this moment of reunion. The aircraft sat like a wounded warrior, its titanium bathtub cockpit and distinctive silhouette unmistakable even in the dim light. Years of desert operations had stripped away its paint in patches, leaving a mottled skin that told stories of countless missions. "She still looks mean," muttered one of the SEALs flanking her. Valkyrie didn't respond, her focus entirely on the machine before her. The Warthog's wings stretched 37 feet across the runway, laden with hardpoints that now sat empty. Her eyes traced the aircraft's ungainly form. Beautiful not in sleekness like fighter jets, but in its brutal functionality. The nose housed what every ground troop revered, the GAU-8 Avenger cannon, a weapon so powerful the entire aircraft was essentially built around it. She reached out, palm flat against the fuselage, feeling the heat of the day still radiating from the metal. The connection was immediate and visceral, like greeting an old friend who had saved her life more times than she could count. Beneath her fingers, she could almost feel the aircraft's pulse, dormant but ready. "You need help getting up there?" asked the other SEAL, eyeing the ladder skeptically. "I've got it," she replied, already moving with practiced efficiency. Valkyrie climbed the access ladder with familiar ease, her body remembering every handhold despite months away from the cockpit. The maintenance crew had appeared, hovering nearby with uncertain expressions, but she paid them no mind. This was her ritual, her communion with the machine that would soon carry her back into combat. The cockpit welcomed her with the distinct smell of hydraulic fluid, old leather, and electronics, an aroma that triggered a flood of muscle memory. She settled into the seat, its contours embracing her like they'd been molded for her body alone. Her hands moved automatically across the instrument panel, fingers finding switches and buttons without conscious thought. The stale air inside the cockpit carried traces of previous pilots, sweat, fear, determination, all preserved in the fabric and controls. To anyone else, this might seem like an obsolete relic, a flying tank from another era. But to her, the Thunderbolt was alive, a partner with whom she danced through deadly skies. She ran her palm across the throttle, remembering the vibration that would soon travel up her arm when the twin engines roared to life. The stick felt right in her hand, an extension of her will. Outside, the SEALs watched with a mixture of doubt and hope, but inside the cockpit, doubt had no place. Valkyrie took a deep breath, centering herself in this space where she belonged. The aircraft might be battered and worn, but so was she. Together, they were about to remind everyone what they were capable of. Valkyrie settled into the A-10's worn seat, her hands moving with practiced precision across the cockpit. The familiar layout greeted her like an old friend. Switches, gauges, and controls, positioned exactly where muscle memory expected them. This wasn't just machinery, this was reunion. Starting pre-flight, she announced through her headset, voice steady despite the stakes. Her fingers danced across the instrument panel, methodically bringing the dormant aircraft back to life. The battery switch clicked into position, followed by the auxiliary power unit whining to life. System by system, she reawakened the sleeping giant. Warning lights flickered, then steadied as each component responded to her touch. Outside, the SEAL captain stood with arms crossed, his weathered face illuminated by the aircraft's gradually brightening exterior lights. Beside him, his team watched with expressions ranging from doubt to fascination. None had expected to witness this tonight. A forgotten warbird preparing to fly from their desperate outpost. APU stable, proceeding with engine start, Valkyrie reported, her focus absolute. She engaged the first engine. For a moment, nothing happened, just a reluctant whine that made several SEALs exchange glances. Then came a cough, followed by a growing rumble that vibrated through the tarmac. Black smoke belched from the exhaust before clearing as the turbine caught and stabilized. The left engine roared to life, its pitch rising to a confident growl that echoed across the base. One of the younger operators broke into an involuntary smile. "Holy shit," he whispered. The second engine followed, more readily than the first. The dual thunder of both power plants running sent a wave of energy through the gathered men. This wasn't just noise, it was the sound of possibility. Valkyrie ran through her checklist with methodical efficiency, testing control surfaces and confirming weapon systems. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon, the massive gun around which the entire aircraft was built, registered as operational. Her HUD illuminated with tactical information, bathing her face in a soft green glow. "All systems operational," she reported, allowing herself the briefest moment of satisfaction. The radio crackled. "Valkyrie, this is Control. You're cleared to taxi." She released the brakes, and the massive aircraft lurched forward, its nose wheel straightening as it rolled onto the cracked runway. Dust swirled in the prop wash, creating ghostly patterns in the floodlights. The SEAL captain watched intently, his earlier skepticism giving way to cautious hope. Lieutenant Cross and his men were still out there, fighting for survival. Now, at least they had a chance. As the Warthog rumbled past the assembled operators, its massive frame vibrating with lethal potential, the message was clear. Valkyrie hadn't needed grand speeches or self-promotion. The thundering engine spoke for her, transforming doubt into belief with every passing second. The A-10 reached the runway threshold and paused, a predator gathering itself before the hunt. "Control, this is Valkyrie. Systems green, engines hot, preparing for taxi." Her voice crackled through the command room speakers, steady and methodical, a stark contrast to the chaos of the past hours. The radio operator glanced at the SEAL captain, whose weathered face betrayed the first hint of cautious hope. Outside, the A-10 Thunderbolt's engines roared to life, their distinctive growl echoing across the forward operating base. The massive aircraft, lovingly nicknamed the Warthog by those who flew and fought alongside it, shuddered as its ancient systems awakened. Dust swirled in the cone of the floodlights, creating halos around the war machine as it began to move. Word spread quickly. SEALs emerged from bunkers, mechanics abandoned their posts, and even the wounded hobbled to doorways. They lined the perimeter of the runway, silent witnesses to what many believed impossible. The captain stood with arms crossed, his face illuminated by the runway lights, watching as the aircraft taxied into position. Valkyrie cleared for takeoff. Came the response from control, the voice tight with anticipation. The Warthog's engines increased their pitch, a thunderous howl that vibrated through the chests of everyone present. She pushed the throttle forward, and the aircraft began its journey down the cracked runway, gathering speed with each passing second. A senior chief who had voiced the loudest doubts stood beside Lieutenant Cross's second-in-command. "Never thought I'd see that bird fly again," he muttered, eyes never leaving the accelerating aircraft. The runway lights streaked past as Valkyrie guided the massive machine forward. In the cockpit, her hands moved with practiced precision over controls that responded to her touch as if recognizing an old friend. The aircraft wasn't just metal and wires to her. It was an extension of herself, a partner she had trusted with her life over 60 missions in the unforgiving skies of Afghanistan. When the Warthog lifted from the ground, a collective breath was released across the base. The massive silhouette rose against the star-filled desert sky, its wings level, its ascent deliberate and powerful. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon protruding from its nose seemed to point the way forward, a promise of the devastation it would soon bring to those threatening their brothers in arms. The radio crackled again. "Control, Valkyrie airborne, proceeding to target coordinates." The captain unfolded his arms, allowing himself the smallest nod of acknowledgement. Around him, the gathered personnel watched in silence as the aircraft banked toward the mountains, its running lights soon becoming indistinguishable from the stars. In that moment, something shifted in the atmosphere of the base. What had been resignation transformed into determination. What had been despair kindled into hope. The impossible had just become possible, all because one person quietly stood when asked a desperate question. The A-10 Thunderbolt thundered down the cracked runway, its engines roaring with defiance against the night. Valkyrie felt the familiar vibration through her body as the massive aircraft gathered speed, dust and heat swirling in violent eddies behind it. The runway lights streaked past in an accelerating blur while she held the stick with practiced confidence, feeling every bump and imperfection through the airframe. Despite its bulk, the Warthog responded to her touch like an extension of herself, the bond between pilot and machine transcending the patchwork maintenance and years of hard service. At precisely the right moment, she pulled back, and the nose lifted toward the star-scattered sky. For a breathless second, the aircraft seemed to hover between earth and air. Then the wheels left the ground, and the Thunderbolt was airborne. Banking slightly to the right, Valkyrie circled the base once, testing the controls and systems. The combat pilot felt a rush of satisfaction as the aircraft performed flawlessly, its aged systems singing under her command. Through the canopy, she could see the forward operating base laid out below, a fragile collection of bunkers and makeshift defenses that had seemed like a death trap just moments before. On the ground, the SEAL captain stood motionless, his weathered face illuminated by the aircraft's navigation lights as it passed overhead. Around him, his team had gathered, weapons still clutched in their hands but momentarily forgotten as they tracked the Warthog's path through the night sky. "She actually did it," muttered one of the operators, disbelief evident in his voice. The captain didn't respond, his eyes never leaving the aircraft. After years in combat, he had learned to recognize turning points when they appeared, moments when the impossible became possible, when hope emerged from desperation. This was one such moment. Lieutenant Cross's voice crackled over the radio, strained and urgent from the valley beyond the mountains. "Base, this is Hammer 2. Situation critical. Enemy closing from 3 sides. Request immediate." The transmission cut off in a burst of static, but it was enough. The captain grabbed his radio, his decision already made. "Valkyrie, this is Base. Hammer 2 is pinned down in the valley. Can you provide support?" Her response came immediately, calm and assured. "Copy that, Base. Coordinates?" As the necessary information was relayed, the SEALs watched the aircraft bank sharply eastward, its silhouette growing smaller against the vast desert night before disappearing beyond the ridgeline. The men exchanged glances, something new replacing the resignation that had gripped them earlier. It wasn't just that help was on the way. It was the realization that sometimes salvation came from the most unexpected sources, that courage wore many faces. The captain lowered his radio, a ghost of a smile crossing his features. "Gentlemen, I believe we just witnessed a miracle." Beyond the jagged mountain ridge, Lieutenant Cross pressed his back against a boulder, the radio clutched in his trembling hand. Blood trickled from a gash above his eye, but he barely noticed it. His team of 6 SEALs had been reduced to 4 in the ambush, the survivors now scattered among the rocks of the narrow valley, pinned down by relentless enemy fire. "Hammer 2 to base, we're surrounded. Repeat, surrounded," Cross rasped into the radio. "Heavy casualties, low ammo, requesting immediate extraction." His voice cracked with exhaustion. They had been fighting for nearly 9 hours straight, and the enemy forces kept growing stronger. Private Jenkins lay beside him, applying pressure to a wound in his thigh, his face gray with pain. 20 yards to their right, specialists Rodriguez and Tanner maintained suppressive fire, but their ammunition was critically low. The distinctive crack of AK-47s echoed through the valley, punctuated by the heavier thump of RPGs striking nearby. "They're moving up the eastern slope," Rodriguez shouted over the din. "I count at least 15 hostiles," Cross acknowledged with a grim nod. They wouldn't survive another coordinated assault. The lieutenant keyed his radio again, desperation evident in his voice. "Hammer 2 to any friendly assets. We are overrun. I say again, we are—" The radio crackled, cutting through his plea with unexpected clarity. A woman's steady voice emerged from the static. "Copy that, Hammer 2. Valkyrie inbound. ETA 3 minutes." Cross froze, exchanging a bewildered glance with Jenkins. "Did she say Valkyrie?" the wounded SEAL whispered, wincing as he shifted position. "Hammer 2, this is Valkyrie. Pop green smoke when you hear me overhead. I'll clear your exfil route." A surge of disbelieving hope rippled through the exhausted team. Cross grabbed a smoke grenade from his vest, holding it ready. "Rodriguez, Tanner, air support incoming, 3 minutes." "Who the hell is Valkyrie?" Tanner called back, ducking as bullets chipped away at his cover. "I don't care if it's the Tooth Fairy," Rodriguez answered, jamming his last magazine into his rifle, "as long as they bring the pain." Cross pressed the radio to his lips. "Valkyrie, this is Hammer 2. 4 friendlies heavily engaged from the north and east. We're almost black on ammo." "Understood, Hammer 2, came the calm reply. "I see your position. Hold tight." In the distance, a low rumble began to build, distinct from the firefight around them. Cross felt it before he heard it clearly, the unmistakable growl of a Warthog's engines. His heart pounded against his ribs as he clutched the smoke grenade tighter. For the first time in hours, Lieutenant Cross allowed himself to believe they might survive this night after all. The A-10 Thunderbolt crested the ridge, its silhouette unmistakable against the darkening sky. Inside the cockpit, Valkyrie's hands moved with practiced precision across the controls, her helmet reflecting the glow of the heads-up display as it populated with heat signatures. The enemy positions lit up like a deadly constellation across her screen. "Lieutenant Cross, this is Valkyrie. Mark your position. Over," she commanded, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Below, the embattled SEALs scrambled for their smoke grenades. Purple smoke billowed upward, creating a hazy beacon amid the chaos of gunfire and explosions. "Smoke deployed. We're pinned down on 3 sides. Heavy armor to the north," Cross replied, his voice strained but controlled. The pilot banked the aircraft sharply, lining up her first run. "Copy that. Keep your heads down. Coming in hot." She descended into the valley like an avenging angel, the massive GAU-8 Avenger cannon spinning to life beneath the aircraft's nose. Her thumb hovered over the trigger for 1 breath, 2, until the enemy vehicles aligned perfectly in her sights. The cannon roared, a thunderous, distinctive sound that every soldier knew, the infamous spurt that had saved countless American lives. 30mm rounds tore through the night, striking the lead vehicle with devastating force. The armored truck erupted in flames, secondary explosions sending debris skyward as ammunition cooked off inside. "Direct hit," someone shouted over the radio. Valkyrie pulled up sharply, banking for another pass. "Targeting technical vehicles to your east," she announced, already lining up her next run. The Warthog's shadow passed over Lieutenant Cross as he rallied his men. The SEALs, moments ago resigned to their fate, now moved with renewed purpose. The odds were shifting before their eyes. "Moving to higher ground," Cross informed her. "Need suppression on the ridgeline." "Copy that," she responded, releasing a cluster of flares to confuse any heat-seeking missiles before diving back into the fray. On her third pass, Valkyrie unleashed a barrage of rockets that shattered an enemy bunker, sending combatants scattering. The SEALs seized the opportunity, advancing through the newly created corridor with tactical precision. "Valkyrie, you're a goddamn miracle," Cross's voice crackled through the radio. She allowed herself the briefest smile. "Just doing my job, Lieutenant." The battle's momentum had shifted completely. Where the SEALs had been surrounded, they now pushed forward aggressively. Where they had been outgunned, they now had the most fearsome close air support in the American arsenal circling overhead. With each thunderous pass of the A-10, another enemy position disintegrated. The Warthog carved a path through the valley like a surgeon's scalpel, precise, methodical, and utterly devastating to anything that stood in its way. For the first time since the ambush began, Lieutenant Cross allowed himself to believe they might all make it home alive. The desert valley erupted in fire and sound as Valkyrie's A-10 thundered overhead. The massive aircraft banked hard, its silhouette dark against the star-strewn sky before diving toward a cluster of enemy bunkers. The GAU-8 cannon roared to life, its distinctive sound, like fabric tearing, echoing across the battlefield as depleted uranium rounds shredded concrete and steel alike. "Hammer 2, this is Valkyrie." Her steady voice crackled through Lieutenant Cross's radio. "I'm clearing your northwest corridor. Move when you see the second explosion." Cross and his battered team huddled behind a ridge of rocks, their ammunition nearly spent. The lieutenant wiped blood from his forehead and signaled his men to prepare. When the promised explosion bloomed orange and black against the night, he gave the command. "Move, move, move!" The SEALs sprinted through the newly created gap, boots pounding across terrain that had seemed impassable just moments before. Above them, Valkyrie banked the Warthog in a tight turn, her eyes scanning for threats through the aircraft's heads-up display. 3 enemy technicals, pickup trucks mounted with heavy machine guns, were speeding toward the exposed operators. Without hesitation, she pushed the control stick forward, diving toward the approaching vehicles. The aircraft's targeting system locked on, and she released a pair of rockets that streaked through the darkness. 2 of the trucks disappeared in balls of flame, while the third swerved wildly, trying to escape. "Valkyrie, we've got heavy fire from the eastern ridge," Cross called out, his voice tight with urgency as his team took cover behind the burned-out hull of an armored vehicle. She acknowledged with a terse, "Copy that," before pulling the aircraft into a climb. Enemy tracers arced through the night, seeking her. The pilot released flares as she executed a series of evasive maneuvers, the massive aircraft responding to her touch with surprising grace. Banking back toward the ridge, she lined up her approach. The cannon spoke again, 30 rounds per second, hammering the enemy position until it fell silent. "Eastern ridge clear. Move now, straight ahead 200 meters to the extraction point," she instructed, her voice betraying none of the strain of combat. The SEALs moved as one, Cross leading them through the corridor Valkyrie had carved through enemy defenses. When a hidden machine gun opened up, pinning them down, the Warthog was there within seconds, its shadow passing overhead like an avenging spirit, before eliminating the threat. 50 meters to extraction, she called out. Circling protectively as the team made their final push, Cross glanced up at the aircraft that had saved them all, its battle-scarred frame silhouetted against the night sky. "Roger that, Valkyrie. And thank you." The A-10 dipped its wings once in acknowledgement as it continued its vigilant orbit, guarding the SEALs until every last man reached safety. The last enemy vehicle erupted in flames, its blackened shell marking the end of the assault. Lieutenant Cross and his men sprinted across open ground, their boots kicking up plumes of dust as they made their way toward the extraction point. Above them, Valkyrie banked the A-10 in a wide circle, her shadow passing over the escaping SEALs like a guardian spirit. "Hammer 2, this is Valkyrie." Her steady voice crackled through their comms. "I've got you covered until extraction is complete." Cross glanced upward at the aircraft, its silhouette unmistakable against the pale desert sky. "Roger that, Valkyrie. You saved our lives today." The pilot made no response beyond a simple acknowledgement tone. She continued her vigilant orbit, scanning the horizon for any remaining threats as the men below reached the waiting helicopter. Only when the extraction bird lifted off did she finally turn the Warthog back toward base. The forward operating base was eerily quiet when Valkyrie approached the runway. Word had spread quickly about what had happened in the valley. Mechanics, soldiers, and support personnel lined the tarmac, standing in respectful silence as the A-10 touched down, its engines winding down with a diminishing roar. She completed her shutdown checklist methodically. Each switch and dial returned to its proper position. When she finally popped the canopy and climbed down, the SEAL captain was waiting at the bottom of the ladder. His weathered face, normally set in grim determination, now held something different, something that looked remarkably like awe. Without a word, he raised his hand in a formal salute. Behind him, the surviving members of his team stood at attention, their faces etched with exhaustion but eyes bright with gratitude. Valkyrie returned the salute crisply. No speeches were necessary. The thunder of the Warthog's guns had spoken for her. "Lieutenant Cross and his men are safe," she reported simply. "Mission complete." The captain nodded. "You did what none of us thought possible." He extended his hand. "Thank you." She shook it firmly, then stepped past him, moving through the silent crowd. No one cheered or applauded. This wasn't that kind of moment. Instead, they parted to let her pass, offering nods of respect as she walked by. By morning, she had already returned to her regular duties, her uniform indistinguishable from dozens of others on base. But something had changed. The SEALs who had doubted her now acknowledged her with quiet nods. The captain included her in briefings without explanation. In a war where survival often hung by the thinnest thread, Valkyrie had rewritten their fate with skill and courage. She hadn't sought recognition, only the chance to use her abilities when they mattered most, and in doing so, she had earned something far more valuable than praise: the wordless, enduring respect of warriors who had witnessed her rise.